Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm welcoming you back to another episode of our Digital Trader Summit. I'm very, very excited about today's episode. We are back in the gas markets, and we will take the global perspective on policy and politics and whatever matters in these crazy times at the moment. Suiting to this episode, I'm here in Boston right now and have with me from Paris, Anne-Sophie Corbeau. She's one of the leading voices in the industry and always vocal, always having strong opinions and viewpoints. She's a global research scholar at Columbia University, and I think no one else would be better suited to sort the big picture for us and then answer as well your questions. I hope for strong engagement. Let us know what you want to discuss using the chat function. You see down there in the Zoom. I will pick up the questions as always. Try to feed it into a dialogue with Anne-Sophie Corbeau. And as I said, super excited about having Anne-Sophie with us and your questions for an engaging dialogue. Anne-Sophie, the floor is yours. I hand over. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jens, for the very kind invitation. Okay, let me share my screen, and here we go. So indeed, today I am going to focus on the different parts of the gas market. First of all, what is happening in Europe, then talk a little bit about the United States and Trump's energy and LNG strategy, then a little bit about the LNG glut, and then finish on global perspectives, which is actually quite a lot about China. So we can say that a year is making a lot of difference in Europe, because here on the left, what I took is basically some extracts of the European Commission statements at the end of the storage withdrawal period in April 2024. And I'm contrasting what they said, and it's almost 1 year ago, with the current situation now. So last year, we were congratulating ourselves because prices were relatively low. They had been consistently below 30 euro per megawatt hour since January 2024. Well, we can say that, in fact, here now we have gas prices which have been pretty much always over 40 euro per megawatt hour since January 2025. Last year, we finished the gas, the winter with record high storage at 58% full. Right now, we are at almost 36%. We will be lucky if we finish the winter at about 30+%, which means we will require a lot of LNG to refill the storage. We were able to reduce our dependency on Russian gas, but in fact, in 2024, we have actually imported much more Russian gas, not only pipeline gas, but also LNG. Maybe people have not really seen that. And finally, there was a recommendation to the member states to continue reducing their gas consumption by at least 15% until March 2025. Well, yes, you can do that, but don't forget that in fact, you have some things that you cannot control, including the weather, and we have seen higher demand in the residential sector, and also wind and hydro generation, and this has had a lot of implications for the gas demand in the power sector. So looking at where we are now and contrasting on the left, the picture of European gas demand, so EU gas demand and Chinese gas demand. And you can see that this is exactly the opposite. In Europe, we have lost about 20% of gas demand between 2021 and 2024. I should note, however, that the gas demand has stabilized in 2024 compared to 2023. However, in China, after a stabilization or even a slight drop in 2022, you can see that gas demand is back to increasing again, and it has been increasing at relatively rapid pace. So Europe, which used to be a very important market, is now much lower, more than 100 BCM lower than China, which of course has implications. But let's not forget that a major difference between Europe and China is that China is less than 50% import dependent. Now, when we are focusing again on Europe, let's have a look at industrial gas demand. As you probably know, European gas demand has been literally decimated in the industrial sector, and this is really visible on this graphic. Industrial gas demand has dropped by more than 20% between 2021 and 2023. However, what we noted in 2024 was a slight recovery. So basically, the demand was only 16% below 2021 in 2024. I think that because the gas prices are now very high, they have doubled since their lows in 2024, at the beginning of 2024, we are probably going to see a stabilization of industrial gas demand and even potentially a drop in industrial gas demand after the recovery in 2024. But what has been probably the most surprising, especially for policymakers, has been what has happened in the power generation sector. Because I think, there is this expectation that when you are installing more solar, more wind, well, the capacity is increasing, and therefore, so should the generation. But both with hydro, which has been at relatively high level, actually at record level in 2024, and also wind, we have seen not only a reduction, but also we are seeing a lot of volatility. And this is having a direct impact on gas-fired generation and therefore on gas demand, which has been leading the gas demand increase that we have been observing on the European gas market since November 2024. And this is probably a surprise for our policymakers because I am pretty sure that seeing wind capacity increasing, they were thinking, oh, now we are fine. We can more and more push renewable into the power system, and therefore we are going to reduce our gas demand. Well, this is in theory correct, except that there is a lot of variability, as you can see. And it's not only true for November last year, as you can see with the dotted line on the graphic on the bottom right, but you can see that even in February 2025, it was also pretty low compared to pretty much all the previous years. And hydro generation, again, was really at record levels in 2024. However, we should expect, unless there is again a lot of rain, this generation to be a little bit lower in 2025. And all of that means that the storage levels, while they are not dramatically low, actually they are pretty much in line with the 5-year average that I would qualify as, the normal years before 2022, 2023, 2024, which were a little bit abnormal. So if I'm looking at the period 2017, 2021, what we are seeing in 2025 is pretty much exactly the same feeding levels for European gas storage. However, the situation is particularly different this year because, well, first of all, we have much lower storage levels than last year. If we continue on the same line, we will be about 27 billion cubic meters lower than in 2024. And also, we have about 15 billion cubic meters less of Russian pipeline gas, the one which was transiting for Ukraine, which means we will need to import a lot more LNG because LNG is the only source of supply available for Europe. We cannot really expect a lot of additional Norwegian gas, Azeri gas, North African gas. I mean, if this is increasing by a couple of BCM, that would be already quite a lot. So the answer for Europe to refill the storage is for the moment going to be LNG. And actually, when we are looking at how we have replaced this Russian pipeline gas, we can see, and this is really striking, that we have been literally replacing Russian pipeline gas by LNG. I should not be absolutely honest that the yellow line is also including Russian LNG. But you can see that our levels of LNG in total are quite high and almost comparable to what you were observing in the period 2016-2017 in terms of absolute levels. and also that the amount of US LNG, because US is now the largest LNG exporter in the world, are pretty high. In fact, roughly 50% of the LNG that we are receiving is now coming from the United States. And this has also to be compared to the fact that we have lost about 20% of our demand between 2021 and 2024. So globally, our gas demand is much more dependent on LNG in general and on US LNG in particular. Now, I am sure everybody has the same question in their minds. What is going to happen in terms of Russian gas? This is a tough question. We try to provide some preliminary answers to that when we wrote a blog with my colleague Tatiana Mitrova in January 2025. And we said one thing for sure. When we are looking at US-Russia negotiations, then oil and gas are going to be on the menu of the negotiations. That is for sure, and especially when you are looking at the sanctions and the restriction. But there is a big difference between oil and gas. Between the US and Russia, we have competition on LNG and on Russian pipeline gas to Europe. And some of the things which might be desirable for Putin's position, in particular, lifting the sanction on Russian LNG, in particular, Arctic LNG 2, might be unacceptable for Trump because Russian LNG is a direct competitor to US LNG, especially at the time where President Trump is trying to push additional LNG plants and help them to take final investment decision. The same way, Russian pipeline gas to Europe, we were mostly thinking, to be absolutely honest, about a deal which would be including some recovery of the transit through Ukraine. Well, that may be more acceptable if the volumes are small, and that could also be good or be perceived in a positive way by some of the leaders, the European leaders in Eastern Europe, like Prime Minister Fico, Prime Minister Orban, and the volumes would be a little bit lower. What we didn't include in our thinking was a revamp of Nord Stream 2. I have to say that when I saw the first announcement that there would be US investors involved in a revamp or return of Nord Stream 2, I was a little bit surprised because for me, well, first of all, President Trump was absolutely against Nord Stream 2 during his first presidency. Second, the volume at stake are very important. Nord Stream 2, the one string which would be still operational, is as important as Plaquemine 1 and 2, which is currently starting, is as important as Alaska LNG. And in terms of the volumes, this is also a very significant gas which will be coming back to Europe. So for us Europeans, of course, that would be great because that will immediately lower the gas price on the European market. However, from a US perspective, I do not really understand why this would be beneficial for them. But let's agree on one thing, LNG and gas is an issue, an item on which US and Russia have divergent perspective. Let me now focus a little bit on Trump's energy and LNG strategy. For those who have read the National Energy Emergency, you may have realized that even though President Trump was talking a lot about drill, baby drill, actually what he was focusing upon is the electricity emergency. And at the bottom of this national energy emergency declaration, there was something which made me really smile, which was, the definition of energy according to the Trump administration, which basically is everything but wind and solar. And you can read the definition if you want. This is here in the middle of the screen. But yeah, there is everything. There is nuclear. There is a kinetic movement of flowing water, which is a very nice way to say hydro. Even critical minerals are included, but not wind and solar. What I think we in general should be focusing upon is, first of all, that there is going to be a lot of needs for additional gas in the United States. First, to feed the LNG plants which are under construction, and potentially to feed the data centers and AI. And on that, I think there is a wide disagreement on exactly how much would be needed by 2030. But drill, baby, drill will be needed in any case because we need a lot more gas. Now, the pause on US LNG export permits to non-FTA countries has ended as expected. What is interesting, however, is that US LNG developers are seeking to renegotiate a little bit the contracts because they are facing higher costs, while President Trump is trying to nudge, convince, or threaten countries to buy more US LNG. And what is interesting is that he's focusing on some countries where I do expect LNG demand will eventually decline. So this is EU, this is Japan. Okay, India is definitely different, but not China, with whom the relationship is a little bit different. Very interesting thing is, when you are putting US LNG in the context of the US EU trade deficit, I should not say LNG trade deficit. In fact, this is a very small part because what the US is reporting is that the amount of revenues coming from US LNG export is about $13 billion. So total US EU trade deficit is actually about $240 billion. So this is very small. So even if you assume that we are going to double our imports of US LNG, this is still only bringing us to what, maybe 10% of the existing deficit. So, okay, this is about 25, $26 billion, but that would definitely not bridge everything. That would also make the EU extremely dependent on US LNG, probably bringing our dependency levels to 80% of US LNG within the total LNG that we are importing. And also, as you can see, I have basically plotted the implied export price against the typical LNG contract formula from the United States. So they seem relatively well aligned. So the other way to basically bridge the LNG, the trade deficit between the US and the EU would be to actually increase the domestic price in the United States. But that would not be something quite welcome by President Trump. So bottom line, I am not completely sure how importing a lot more US LNG is going to solve that a lot. It's going to contribute, but it's definitely not completely solving everything. Now, looking ahead, there is a record amount of LNG supply, which is currently under construction. I mean, if I look at the numbers, we are at about 320 billion cubic meters. This is a lot more than during the first wave, which was around Qatar, 2009, 2011, that was around 100 BCM. This is much more than the wave during 2015, 2019, which was about 200 billion cubic meters. But there are a lot of caveats. First of all, a lot of projects are delayed, not that many are on time. The second is that we have had a project which has been totally sanctioned, Arctic LNG 2, that I mentioned before, which has not been able to start, that may be about to start, but that would require an agreement between the US and Russia. And I have mentioned this is not looking particularly favorable from the US perspective. And well, I have put for the Qataris that they are very silent, hopefully on time, but we can have also some question marks about what role Qatar will play in, this big increase in terms of LNG. And for everything which is 2027 and beyond, well, it's probably too early to say whether they are going to be on time or not, because I have been long enough in this industry to know that projects delays happen all the time. And finally, there is the Mozambique LNG project, which is probably postponed to 2030 and potentially beyond. And yes, we should be absolutely careful about the usual delays, and what I call Murphy's law. So the usual delays here, I am comparing, the picture that we could have been looking at 18 months ago and what we are looking at in terms of additional LNG now. And this is only looking at plants which, have been under construction. If we didn't have the sanctions on Arctic LNG2, if Golden Pass had not been delayed, if Senegal and Mauritania had not been delayed, etc., we would be in a much better LNG supply situation than we are now. But because of delays and sanctions, well, we are in a situation where the increase in terms of LNG is going to start looking a little bit more healthy in 2025, but it's not as healthy as we could have hoped. And Murphy's laws is basically something that I learned from my BP days. Something somewhere is going to go wrong and is going to reduce the amount of LNG which is eventually going to be available. I cannot say what it's going to be, but for sure something somewhere is going to happen. And this is making our lives a little bit more spicy, of course. But looking at the numbers, I mean, if I remove Mozambique and if I remove Arctic LNG2, we still have about 270 billion cubic meters of LNG capacity, which is coming to the market. So yes, maybe some of that is going to go to Europe to meet basically the increase in LNG demand. If we agree that maybe there is not going to be Russian pipeline gas coming back, yes, there is going to be some decline in terms of existing LNG supply. But what that still means is that this LNG will mostly go to Asia. So roughly, we need the existing Asian LNG demand minus Japan and Korea to double within 5 years. Well, this is going to be very interesting indeed. I mean, that's a lot of LNG. And I know, when we were saying in 2015, 16, oh my God, there is so much LNG coming to the market. Where is it going to find a home? Yeah, but at that time, I think the perspectives were quite different. And we were probably, not so much in the framework of LNG demand going to peak one day, maybe not. I think we are in a different environment now, and especially you are much more relying on these Asian markets. And this is where geopolitics is going to be very interesting because the fact that, there is this trade war restarting again, potentially between China and the US means we have the largest LNG exporter and the largest LNG importer who may not get along. They are much less dependent on each other than Europe and the US. That's for sure. It's about 5-6% dependent on each other. But the problem is that there are a lot of Chinese companies which have contracted US LNG. Of course, it can be sent to some other places, but Chinese LNG players are also very important for the projects which have not taken FID yet. And there are still about 10 billion cubic meters of contracts which had been signed and agreed upon, but the projects have not taken final investment decision yet. So that's something to watch. We have not seen any US LNG cargo landing in China since the beginning of February. That's not completely unusual, but this is definitely something to watch. And finally, what if China does the same thing as in 2022? Because let's remember what happened in 2022. In Europe, we managed to get an additional 50 plus billion cubic meters of LNG because, yes, LNG supply increased, but also because Chinese LNG imports declined. And what we have observed at the beginning of 2025 is a drop of LNG imports in January and February. So I'm not saying that we are going to look at a big decline like we did in 2022, but it's not completely implausible that because of geopolitics, because of the high LNG prices, because of all these trade complications between the US and China, we might actually see a lower LNG demand, LNG imports in China, especially if the economy is slowing down in China. And I will stop there and welcome your questions.
Anne-Sophie, this was amazing. You covered so much ground. I think this gives us lots of input for further discussion. I don't, just a technical thing, I don't see you right now on screen, but that
Yeah,
is the
I am coming
problem.
back. I should be coming back. Okay, that's interesting. Apologies. It seems that my video has decided to stop while I was presenting. Apologies for that.
Okay. Um, where to start? We have some questions. I right jump into it, maybe starting with the delays. Are most of the delays just of technical nature, or are there as well exactly speculations around future market prices, which may slow down some of the investments in facing these kind of insecurities right now?
So there were two different things for the delays I mentioned in my slides. The first one was the sanctions on Arctic LNG 2. The US administration had been extremely thorough in terms of preventing this new LNG plant in Russia to start, also because there had been the pause on US LNG. But there were also a certain number of projects, like Golden Pass, for example, had been delayed. Initially, it was expected to start in early 2024. It is now expected, no, sorry, at the end of 2024. It is now expected to start late 2025, beginning of 2026. The project in Senegal and Mauritania was also expected to start at the beginning of 2024. It is starting now. So there have been a lot of technical delays, but let's face it, I mean, the problem with the LNG industry is that usually there are a lot of delays, and this has been compounded by, the COVID issues and other things.
All right, good. And on the demand side, do we talk here as well about replacing coal or coal switching? Does that play a role, especially in Asia right now? So is there a strong
Well,
dependence on prices?
This is the key question, in fact, because I have been working for a long time in the LNG industry. And basically, the big message has always been there is so much coal-fired generation. There is in the world, about 1/3 of the total generation is coming from coal, and a lot of that is coming from Asia. And there has always been this talk, let's replace coal-fired generation. However, the problem is that in one of the big countries, China, gas is actually playing a very small role. Second, in China, coal is also synonymous with energy security. And in the rest of the other countries, well, coal is very often domestic, not in all the countries, but basically you need to have very cheap LNG in order to displace existing coal, especially in the absence of a carbon price. And this is why, for me, it is not easy to believe in a story where you have relatively young coal-fired generation, coal-fired plants being replaced by new CCGTs that have still to be built. Not even mentioning the fact that you need to build the LNG import terminals.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes totally sense. A lot of interest is around your metrics you have shown there, and
I'm
I
sure.
it's so that you say, yeah, we need to find for LNG and for pipeline gas some kind of a middle ground compromise. So a little bit of LNG maybe continuing as it is today, maybe some transit again through Ukraine. I guess there's as well some discussions in recent months which got a little bit more silent. What is with Russia, maybe Russian gas flowing through Azerbaijan, maybe the current LNG flows from Russia are not so much discussed anymore. So is this already leading a little bit the direction where we could end it? What is your personal opinion?
I disagree with the fact that LNG from Russia is no longer discussed. Actually, I would probably argue that this is even more discussed than before at the European level, with the view that we absolutely need to get rid of Russian LNG sooner than later. So that's the first point. And I think in Europe, my opinion is that if we don't really have an agreement which will be involving Russian LNG, we will get rid of Russian LNG as soon as possible. The second question on Azeri gas, which would be replacing Russian pipeline gas, and this is what had been discussed in August, September last year. For me, I mean, that was a solution which was actually not a solution. That was just allowing Russian pipeline gas to continue to flow to Europe in these guys because there is not that much spare Azeri gas in any case. So if you want to do that, okay, but just recognize that this is just a continuation of what was happening before. I think the Ukrainians have said no to that. But if we had a peace agreement, which would include all the parties, I could see some Ukrainian transit coming back because it would, fit. Well, okay, for the US, this is not too much. For Russia, this is coming back through the door. For Ukraine, this is helping them a little bit with their current system because, their storage levels are pretty low. And for some European leaders, not all of them, this is actually helping their balance, especially when you are in Hungary and in Slovakia and in Austria. Nord Stream 2, I do have difficulties with that one. I know it has been discussed, and I know my friend Tatiana says, I think now nothing is impossible. I agree with her, nothing is impossible, but this is one that I have difficulties to swallow. It's so much politically tainted that you need to convince the Germans to accept it. You need to convince all the countries to allow for the repairs, including Denmark. It's a lot of gas. Yes, I can understand why that would be beneficial in 2025, given our very tight market. I do not understand why on earth the US, the Senate, the US LNG exporters will allow that to happen. That I really don't understand. I can definitely understand the Russian perspective, and they would be more than happy for that pipeline to come back.
Yeah, maybe it's just this is the case to get them into a discussion and negotiation, actually. So if we assume that everyone sits at the table, question mark, would be Europe be able to have one strong opinion, or are we too fragmented in our views as well as Europe? You mentioned a few countries which seem to take a
Yes,
different.
no, that's correct. I mean, I don't think we have one unified opinion, and we don't have one unified opinion about Russian pipeline gas. We don't have one unified opinion about Russian LNG, which is why a certain number of countries say we need to get rid of Russian LNG now. I can also see and I hear that European industrials would very much like Russian pipeline gas to come back. Just because it's bringing additional supply. And, if you are looking at the equilibrium between supply and demand, that would have an immediate impact on gas prices. And this is what they are seeing. It's not like they lack Russian gas. It's just that in the global gas system, this is the only available gas supply, which is, like the spare capacity, the reserve capacity. This is the only one that we can bring almost immediately back to the market.
Yes, yes. Many of these discussions are very short-term oriented right now, or very transactional in a way. One of our participants points out that there's as well not just the flow effects in terms of volume, but we have to consider as well the prices. So at the current price level, everyone is somewhat benefiting from it because we have this extreme volatility. Does that play a role, or you think there will be more midterm, longer term perspectives at stake when we discuss such a outcome of the peace talks?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this is also what I was mentioning in one of my LinkedIn posts. I mean, if you are bringing, well, let's say one string of Nord Stream 2, so this is about 27 billion cubic meters. This is the same size as Plaquemine 1 and 2. This is the same size as Alaska LNG. So all other things being equal, you may be actually reducing in the long term your LNG demand, and you can potentially refer to, the Shell LNG outlook. So you will need to decrease that. I can agree that maybe this is going to revive some lost EU industrial demand, but I don't think this is going to revive 27 billion cubic meters of EU industrial demand, maybe 10 BCM, and that would be an heroic assumption already.
Yeah.
And eventually, our trajectory is still downward. So again, I mean, in my opinion, LNG exporters would be shooting themselves in the foot. And if you are bringing not only Nord Stream 2, but also Arctic LNG 2, which is the same size, so basically twice 27 billion cubic meters, well, you will need to make some adjustments to the Shell LNG outlook. Basically, reducing downward a little bit the LNG demand, maybe not 27, but something like 15 billion cubic meters, and increasing the supply by about 27 BCM. So you see this kind of little window, which was at the end of the graphic, like on the right side, it would be getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
Not exactly the kind of picture that maybe US LNG exporters and some LNG exporters in general want to see.
So if the prices stay high, maybe even the Russians are not pressing hard on exporting more flows if they can keep the price level up. Yeah. So they benefit from
That's
other.
indeed the balancing of, their revenues. But, the thing is that for Russia, oil is about money and gas is about geopolitics. This is why for Putin, this is so important to revive, Arctic LNG 2. This is because it's about geopolitics. It's about the North Route. It's about access to Asia. So you have to think like Putin. You cannot just understand, okay, money. I mean, for God's sake, he has literally cut most of the Russian pipeline gas to Europe. And of course, he's losing revenues, right? If it were only about money, he would never have done that. And this is a big mistake that we have made, in early 2022 when we thought, okay, interdependency should be working, is never going to cut the gas. When he did cut the gas.
Yeah. Let's switch maybe to one topic which is as well front and state of the center right now. It's the storage policy we have in Europe. You have shown the developments over the last years, so that in a longer term perspective, we don't have these very low levels of storage. But yes, the storage policy to fill storage to 90% in November has actually driven up prices massively or invited speculation of market participants. Do we have clarity right now, or will this be a discussion? Yeah, we'll continue to have this discussion till the summer because we're getting late now. We're filling, no?
Yes, we are getting. So there has been a proposal from the European Commission, which is basically giving a little bit of flexibility for the intermediary targets, but still keeping the 90% targets for most of the countries, or I would say, the biggest ones like Germany, France, Italy, etc. You are giving some exemptions to some other countries, but it doesn't really change anything massively. I mean, I do have a problem with, basically this storage policy because Europe used to have basically three pillars of flexibility. One was the interaction between LNG and Russian pipeline gas. It's gone. The second one was the interaction between natural gas and coal in the power generation sector. It's kind of going. The last one was a huge amount of storage. If you are literally freezing that with intermediary targets all along the year, you are completely removing the flexibility on the global gas market. So who is going to provide the flexibility on global gas market now? China? Ah.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. What I hear as well from Brussels is that there's voices who differentiate and saying there's one thing which is on paper, the 90%, but in reality as well in the past, countries who are not following this obligation, like Denmark, had as well not to fear any consequences from the EU. So maybe in reality, things will turn out differently, or do we need to wait for policy change or for some clear messages from Brussels?
I don't think they are going to, basically prosecute countries if they reach like, 89, 80, 85%. I mean, that would be completely crazy. I mean, given, the current state of the global gas market. I mean, suppose tomorrow, again, Murphy Law, a plant somewhere, a big one, is gone, like Freeport in 2022. I mean, what are you going to do? The IEA is expecting global LNG supply to increase by 25 BCM in 2025. So if we have a big plant gone, it's going to be a massive fight on global gas market, and we are going to be back where we were 2 years ago. So in that situation, you can't really expect, countries to invent LNG. What, however, should be done, and I don't understand why, people are not doing that again, is focus more on how you can actually reduce the gas consumption without really harming the industrial sectors. I mean, there are still a lot of, energy efficiency, encouraging people to reduce their gas and their power consumption. I swear I'm going to scream if this summer again I am seeing people with air conditioning blowing and basically the windows and the doors open in, some shops, etc. And how much do you want to bet that this is going to happen?
Yeah. So you're saying the price sensitivity to gas prices is not leading to any action right now? We have still just the behavior of
In the
shutting
industrial
down.
sector,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And I don't think the industrial sector can do more. But I think for a lot of, people, residential sector, commercial, etc., okay, the costs have increased, but, those who can afford are basically back to normal. So, and I am seeing that around me, like people, I mean, okay, I am teaching, for example, and the other day, we had to literally open the windows because my students were too hot. Does that
Yeah.
make any sense? No, it doesn't. Why are we so hot?
Understood. If you look to European policymakers right now, it seems regularly that they're not trusting the markets to regulate that when it comes to storage, but as well overall to find a supply balance regarding LNG. So they do involve in importing or want to potentially have at least an open door still to engage themselves in importing LNG as a European Union, maybe crafting a deal with the US or similar. And we still have the storage discussion. We had the discussion around still price caps. How do you see how to say that? How much trust is left on a European level in gas prices? As the industry always says, the prices that the markets are working, but the outcomes are still unfortunate for economy and for politicians who have to explain it.
Yes, I know. I mean, I remember this discussion and this quote from Mrs. van der Leyen that, TTF is no longer the right benchmark or something like that, And hell, no. I mean, the reason why TTF was disconnected from, LNG import prices was basically it was showing the fact that we didn't have enough LNG import capacity in the Northwestern market. I think sometimes, our policymakers do not have the right information or they are basically going towards the wrong conclusion. I mean, when I read the Draghi report, I had the impression that we wanted to basically erase 20 years of liberalization. Let's go back to all index contracts. Hell, I mean, I'm sure Sergei Komlev, the former chief economist of Gazprom Export, must have been laughing so much when he read that report because, I remember him 10 years ago saying all indexation is good. You guys have no idea what you are doing because you are basically moving towards spot indexation. You are going to be very dependent on one single player, that is us, Russia, and you are going to pay the price eventually. Well, indeed, we paid the price eventually. So do we need to go back to oil indexation? Well, there were good reasons why we moved away from oil indexation. It doesn't actually tell you whether the gas market is tight or loose. And there were some good reasons. But, we seem to go back to regulation, regulation, regulation. Well, I don't think regulation is always, over-regulating the market is always a good solution, as we are seeing now with the refilling of storage. Also, I mean, I do not completely trust policymakers to be like buying LNG. I don't think they are capable of reading the fine print at the bottom of the contracts and something somewhere is going to happen. I don't think also the aggregate EU platform has been such a tremendous success. I mean, nobody I have ever met, whether these are the buyers who were basically nudged to participate, the sellers who were nudged to participate, nobody can actually find a good thing to say about that platform. Yes, there was a lot of interest, But this is Tinder for gas. Yes, there is a lot of interest, but this is not because you are interested that you are getting married. And there has not been a lot of contracts signed from what we can understand from the market. On top of that, I almost fell from my chair when I saw the suggestions that Europe should invest into LNG export terminals outside of Europe. Okay, so how is that exactly consistent with the 90% emission reduction target by 2040 and the fact that our demand presumably is going to be much lower? Why are we not investing in our own domestic gas production? Why are we not investing into Norwegian gas production, which at least is nearby, is locked to our system, is low methane emission? It seems to me that this is more a political deal than anything else in order to appease, Mr. Trump and show goodwill. But is that really something good eventually for Europe? I am not quite sure. I think we should invest in our own gas and nearby gas, Norwegian gas first, and then look at whether we want to invest. Also, the Japanese system was presented as a good idea, etc. I mean, let me remind people how the situation was 10 years ago. Japanese were always talked as the people who were ready to pay a premium for security of supply. When we were paying $10 per MMBTU, they were paying 13, 14, $15 per MMBTU. So it's not because you invest into an LNG export terminal that you are getting cheap gas. And we will be investing into LNG export terminals just at the time where a lot of LNG is coming to the market and gas prices should come down. So explain to me exactly the rationale. I don't understand.
No, I understand. I fully agree. And allow me to add my view on this as well. I've been maybe the most vocal critic on Aggregate EU. I even sued the European Commission on this because I'm fed up with these ideas which don't work, obviously. But I want to say as well on the other side that I think it's not enough, and the industry comes back always again to the simple phrase, the markets are working. That's not good enough. I think we have to have a better dialogue, proactive dialogue with policymakers, guiding them and find joint solutions. Just saying the markets will solve it with the price swings we have seen, destabilizing. Yeah.
On that, I am with you.
Not enough. It's not enough.
I am with you that what has happened over the past 2 months on the European gas market, I mean, gas prices should never even have been doing the peak that they have been doing. The volatility going to above 50 euro per megawatt hours was completely insane. It should never have happened. So I am in agreement with having, some sort of market observatory with regulators looking in depth at what is exactly happening on these markets and who is taking positions and how. That I am in full agreement with that. There are some people who are playing with the market at the expense of the European consumers. But
Yeah.
the investment, the aggregate, etc., I do have reservations.
Yeah.
And I do have reservations on price caps as well, by the way.
Absolutely.
Fortunately, we didn't have them.
I'm
Fortunately.
totally free markets, but we have to measure as well the efficiency and the effectiveness of the markets on the outcomes. Not about liking them or not, but what kind of environment it creates for society and industry specifically. So I think where we have to be as well more critical, maybe as an industry. Coming slowly to an end, maybe give us a very quick outlook how you see this year unfolding, maybe in the next couple of months, if you will. I'd like to. Any outlook, any prediction you want to make?
Well, first of all, I think, we need to keep our eyes on what is going to happen between Russia, US, EU, and Ukraine. That's the first thing, which is very important. The second thing is have an understanding about what is going on with China, because I think, this is actually much more important and could balance the market and actually play in our favor. I don't think that, we are out of the crisis in Europe. I would definitely insist on the fact that trying to lower in a soft way our demand in terms of power, in terms of gas, looking at the residential commercial sector would be a good idea. Please try to do that. Hopefully not too much Murphy law, but unexpected things can happen. And finally, trying to understand how exactly Qatar is going to play this out is, I think, the next big question for the gas industry.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to talk about methane emissions and all these negotiations. That I think is a story for a little bit later. But we should still keep that in mind because I'm sure that this is going to be talked about in some corners there and there. But this is really for, in a few years from now.
Wonderful. And Sophie, this was so much fun. I really enjoyed it a lot. You gave us a great perspective on things. I think beyond the daily tweets on X and the hectic we have at the moment in the market, taking a little bit the midterm and longer term perspective. Thanks very much for sharing this. I guess in the current environment, we could invite you every month. I hope to see you back at some time, and wish
We will
everyone
see each other in a couple of weeks in Lausanne, that's for sure. And I'm looking forward to it.
definitely do that and continue our discussion. Thanks a lot to you. Thanks to everyone participating. Hope to see many of you back in another Digital Trader Summit session. We'll follow up in the next weeks with new topics. Thanks very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.